There's no question in my mind that the best safety management system cannot produce the best safety result without a very strong and positive culture. I have used this theme or this expression that safety culture is the glue that keeps the safety management systems together and hopefully prevent it from falling apart. Having said that, we have Nick and I will host the two speakers. Nick will introduce our professor. You'll hear more about Professor next. And then I'll introduce our Canadian friend, and I've got some words about him later. Nick?
Great, thank you. So we're very lucky today to have Professor Tim Voges with us. He is currently at Vanderbilt Owens, the Owen Graduate School of Management. He's been there since 2004. He was recently named one of the 50 most influential business professors of 2013 and was earlier named one of the top 40 business school professors under 40. His research really focuses on the specification of the mechanisms through which organizations create and sustain a culture of safety, a set of safety behaviors by which collectives detect and correct errors and unexpected events, especially in the healthcare setting. And I think it's just been great to have views from other industries, and the healthcare one probably near and dear to all of our hearts, right, as to how we make that better. I also noticed that in addition to previously working at Ford Motor Company and Anderson Consulting, you're also a graduate of both the University of Michigan and Michigan State University. I didn't think that was allowed. So obviously a man of diverse talents and background, Professor Tim Voges.
Or that's a specific indicator of mental illness. But I am a diehard Spartan athletics fan, so go green, go Michigan State. Okay, I love the University of Michigan, though. So thanks for having me. Thanks for allowing a rogue academic to descend in on this this meeting with people who work out in the real world. So it's nice to join into that. I was struck earlier today by something Jeff said about people coming in remotely via online, looking at me on camera, and some of those folks being in Calgary. I just want to alert them, it is February in Calgary. You might have wanted to come here. That seems like a bad choice. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about research I've been doing over the past decade plus in the healthcare industry. And so what I hope it will do is serve to integrate some of the themes you've heard today and add some new little twists and nuances as well. So let's see. All right. So why healthcare? Why am I a relevant person to be here? That you might ask that question even after I sufficiently answer why healthcare. So why healthcare? Because reliability continues to be a persistent and costly problem, so upwards of 98,000 deaths annually in this classic Institute of Medicine report. But it might even be significantly higher with more kind of refined mechanisms detecting what is actually a death caused by healthcare. It might be orders of magnitude higher than that. And there have been massive improvement efforts over the past decade plus, although most assessments of those efforts is they have achieved quite little. So now you're probably really wondering why I'm here. First step is I'll make you feel good about your industry. So Don was talking earlier about how aviation hasn't had an incident in 8 years. I think healthcare maybe 8 seconds, and we do high fives if we haven't had an error in that amount of time. So there are these big problems, but I think that gives us a window into variation, because there are some healthcare organizations that do things really well. So by being able to systematically and quantitatively explain that variation, we can maybe hone in on some more specific behaviors that might generate reliability and safety across all industries. That's at least my hope. So the other reason why healthcare is I think it's generalizable across for those working in pipelines, nuclear, all these other industries, because it's complex, so it's very cognitively demanding work. The data I'm going to present to you is primarily going to come from hospital nursing units. So nursing work is very complex work. Those are the people on the front lines detecting, and you need me to, okay. I need to work the mic. I do some amateur hip hop if you want to Google me. So I should know how to work the mic a little better than this. So it's cognitively demanding work. It's very dynamic work. It's highly uncertain about what the right diagnosis is for a patient, and even once the diagnosis is right, what's the best way to treat them, because disease processes unfold differently with different types of people. There are always numerous exceptions. There could be missing information, missing materials, and we have to engage in persistent workarounds in healthcare. Healthcare is also highly interdependent work. It's interdependent across shifts, where people have to hand off patients across those shifts, and there's also distributed expertise. I might know how to do a specific procedure really well. Masood might know how to do a different one, so we kind of pool our expertise in the course of caring for patients. So those are some of the kind of general parameters of healthcare. And so based on a review of research done over the past 20 plus years in healthcare, this is the very simple, especially compared to some of the things you've seen earlier today, which are much more detailed than what I have here. But I think I've abstracted from it in a way that I hope represents a profound simplicity rather than an unknowing simplicity. So I see safety culture as being constituted by three elements that are going to connect very well with what you've heard earlier today. So when we talk about a safety culture, we talk about things leaders do to set the context for safety culture. How do they enable a safety culture? You heard a lot about that today. You heard about it from Armando when he was talking about reducing fear of punishment, reducing tribal knowledge, getting more information sharing across the organization. That's something that a leader infuses. You heard it from Nick, and you heard it again repeated from Masood. I wrote down the exact same thing about writing on the board, my job is to improve safety culture. That's setting a tone, right? That we're not going to trade off safety for other things. You also heard that from Bill at DuPont. You know, those core values come before even having a conversation about production or profits, right? Safety's first. So it's really prioritizing those things. We heard about that from getting people to speak up from the lemon and the lemonade wall, which I thought was really interesting. We also heard a lot about non-punitive reporting, being a consistent theme across all the speakers. So those are things leaders can do. They direct attention to safety, and they create contexts where it's safe for people to speak up. They feel psychologically safe to speak hard truths to the organization. Hey, these are things that are not going right. We need to get on them. We need to fix them. And you heard that across a lot of the speakers. And that's nice. That's a great starting point. And that's probably the things that organizations pick up fastest. But that has to be translated on the front line into real action. So that's about how a safety culture gets enacted. So what are frontline people doing to actually surface those latent things that haven't gone awry and manifest things that already have threats to safety? And how are we mobilizing resources to reduce those threats? In a couple minutes, I'm going to talk about some very specific behaviors that I think really hit on how do you enact a safety culture? What do you do behaviorally? And so that enabling sets up the actions people carry out on the front line, which leads to safety outcomes. Can be good, can be bad, right? And then, as we've heard from a few folks about different audits, Six Sigma tools, lean tools, those are ways in which you elaborate a safety culture. So you systematically reflect on the outcomes you've achieved, good or bad, and you want to develop comprehensive representations of those outcomes, and then that provides feedback to the frontline enactments. What do people on the front line actually need to be doing differently? And then what kind of practices do leaders need to be putting in place? So that elaborating mechanism feeds back in those kind of ways. This next slide is just a more detailed dive into some of the specific activities that happen in healthcare organizations that may be a little bit less use to you, but I feel the need to be comprehensive. So there are, what are leader behaviors and practices? We talked a little bit about some of those, but also human resource practices. We're going to come back to those in a few minutes. Hiring, training, rewarding, performance evaluation, those kind of things. There were folks who talked a little bit earlier about, I think INPO was a great example of this, FAA was another great example of this, about external agencies and how they can kind of set the tone, light the fire for, well, maybe light the fire is a bad metaphor for talking to pipeline people. Yeah, don't do that. Keep it nice and cool. And in Calgary, that shouldn't be a problem. So these external agencies can kind of create a context in which this could happen where people want to pursue safety culture. And then enacting things are people reporting and voicing concerns, coordinating at transitions, doing nice safe handovers, and across interdependent functions, having checklists, things like that. And then elaborating would be things that we've talked about with audits, but also in healthcare, there are things like mortality and morbidity conferences when things have gone really badly. We talked about what happened, kind of after event reviews that you also might see smaller scale ones in the form of debriefings, things like that. Okay? So that's kind of safety culture. Now, where do we observe it? Well, I've told you, we don't observe it in healthcare very much. So what I draw upon is the research on high reliability organizations. So you've heard from many of those industries already. So aircraft carrier flight decks, nuclear power control rooms. PG&E's Diablo Canyon is a site of a lot of this research. The air traffic control towers. So these are all organizations where you would expect to observe a lot of errors because they're dealing with such complex technologies and such complex processes, but you actually observe very few. And then the question becomes, why? Now, the tough thing that people who study these, the tough aspect of people studying these organizations is they are already highly reliable. So you can describe what they do, but you don't know whether what they do is actually causing the reliability or if it's just, the other crappy organizations who do the same things too. Fortunately for you, there are many crappy healthcare organizations, so I can systematically analyze the variance here. So we'll talk about that. So high reliability organizations have nearly error-free operations in contexts that are extremely complex, dynamic, and interdependent, much like I told you healthcare is. So what behaviors underlie safety culture? And this is a lot of lingo for after lunch, so I apologize that. So I'm going to take a couple slides to really break it down and make it behavioral, okay? So I'm going to talk about processes of mindful organizing. So I'm not talking about, because you might be wondering, I'm some goofball academic who's calling healthcare crappy. Is he going to talk to us about meditation? I'm not going to talk to you about meditation. So when I'm talking about mindfulness, I'm not talking about mindfulness meditation. I'm talking about it as a social practice, as the character of the interactions that people have. And it consists of a few specific types of interactions. So preoccupation with failure, reluctance to simplify interpretations, sensitivity to operations, commitment to resilience, and deference to expertise. And what those sets of behaviors buy you together is the rapid detection and correction of errors and unexpected events, okay? So mindful organizing occurs when people are spending time identifying what could go wrong. That's being preoccupied with failure. Discussing alternatives as to how to go about their everyday activities, proactively doing so. That's being reluctant to simplify interpretations. Developing an understanding of who knows what. Where does expertise reside in the organization? That's being sensitive to operations. Talking about mistakes and ways to learn from them. And those mistakes can be close calls rather than just, errors. So that's commitment to resilience, commitment to bouncing back. And then taking advantage of the unique skills of one's colleagues, even if that person is of lower formal status in the organization. So that's deferring to expertise rather than deferring to authority, okay? So one more crack at these to make sure you really got them. So this is how we measure them. So that right-hand column is 9 survey items that are, each one of those items is rated on a 1 to 7 scale. And so they're added up across them and averaged. So you would have a 1 to 7 score on mindful organizing. And so those individuals who get surveyed, then it gets aggregated to a unit level or organization level, depending on what I'm studying. So with preoccupation with failure, and these are tailored to the healthcare context, we've done some other work that's started to generalize it to other contexts, so you would just change the language slightly to generalize it to pipelines, for example. So preoccupation with failure, so that's like chronic wariness of the unexpected. So 2 items related to that are when giving report to an oncoming nurse, you can think about when handing off anything to someone else, we usually discuss what to look out for. We spend time identifying activities we do not want to go wrong. So that's being preoccupied with failure. Reluctance to simplify interpretations is questioning assumptions and received wisdom. So we discuss alternatives as to how to go about our everyday work activities. Sensitivity to operations is an up-to-date knowledge of where expertise resides. So it's having a good understanding of each other's talents and skills and actively discussing our unique skills with each other so we know who on a unit has relevant specialized skills and expertise. So those 3 pieces, preoccupation with failure, reluctance to simplify interpretations, and sensitivity to operations, are proactive capabilities. Those are things you're doing before the stuff hits the fan. All right, the next 2 are more about containment. Stuff started to go awry, how do you make sure you minimize it? So that's commitment to resilience. So it's deliberate learning from experience. So it's talking about mistakes and ways to learn from them. And when errors happen, we discuss how we could have prevented them. And then lastly, deference to expertise is migrating decision-making to the person with the most expertise, not the most authority. So when attempting to resolve a problem, we take advantage of the unique skills of our colleagues. When a patient crisis occurs, we rapidly pool our collective expertise to attempt to resolve it. So again, those 9 items are then averaged together and you get a 1 to 7 scale. Now I've given you a lot of preamble. You might ask me, Tim, does this matter at all for anything we care about? And the answer is yes, quite unequivocally. So I did a study of 95 hospital nursing units, and what I found was that a 1-unit change, so remember I'm measuring this on a 1 to 7 scale. If you go from 5 to 6 on that scale, that much movement decreases medication errors by 35%. You go move 1 unit, it decreases patient falls by 69%. These are massive improvements, right? And they don't seem, based on what we're talking about here, especially costly things. It's getting people to think about and carry out their work in slightly different ways, okay? And then I also did a separate study of 125 nursing units where I asked managers to rate performance on their unit relative to other units in their hospital related to quality and safety. And again, mindful organizing had a strong and significant effect, okay? Now, I'm not saying mindful organizing replaces everything else you need to know about safety. It certainly does not. So it doesn't occur in a vacuum, and there are other practices that you might have in place. We heard a lot about kind of procedures, policies, standards, checklists, and things like that. And those are certainly present in healthcare too, and we looked at one specific one. We looked at care pathways. So that's the standardization of care according to a best practice. And so how that helps enhance the value of these mindful organizing conversations is it helps to structure interactions, so I know who I need to be talking to at what times. It helps build deeper connections, so if you have a better, more trusting relationship with somebody, you're going to be able to engage in these mindful organizing even more fully, and it helps facilitate coordination. So all we did was measure, are the majority of the patients on your unit on care pathways? A real simple measure, and what we found was that pairing high levels of mindful organizing, so that's closer to 7 on that 1 to 7 scale, with the extensive use of pathways, and you get additional bang for the buck in terms of fewer medication errors. So there's even a further reduction of medication errors by pairing high levels of mindful organizing and extensive use of care pathways. So we've made the case at least a little bit that mindful organizing matters to outcomes we care about, and it's also enhanced by other safety practices that might be familiar to things your organization's already doing. Now, what can leaders do to actually enable it? So that gets back to, I said we were going to come back to HR practices, and here we are. So when I'm talking about HR practices, I'm not talking about the HR office, okay? In hospitals, those are very uninfluential people. And I put a lot of my students in HR jobs. So I tell them not to go into the healthcare industry because they will have no influence whatsoever. So when I'm talking about HR practices, I'm talking about the operating, the line managers, and they're the ones deploying these practices. So I've seen huge variation within a specific hospital. They might have the same policy manual, they might have the same evaluation forms, but the manner in which they go about implementing it is wildly different. And I know that drives somebody like our friend from DuPont probably crazy, right, to get that much intra-organizational variation. You're like, let us in there, we'll consult, we'll solve these guys' problems. So the HR practices I'm talking about are things like selective staffing. So it's not just hiring the best people, of course everyone wants to do that, but it's hiring for interpersonal as well as technical skills, because we want to shape people's ability to have these mindful organizing conversations. It's about extensive training, and one of the things that's really important in healthcare organizations in nursing contexts are what are called preceptor programs. So pairing up an inexperienced nurse with a more experienced nurse and helping embed that new person into the social network of the unit. Right, because that's the way they're going to get access to the knowledge that actually resides there. And that requires explicit practices because there is a history in nursing, and one of the frequent things said about nursing is nurses eat their young. So you need to put some specific practices in place to make sure those more experienced folks are helping along those new folks. Also, training in interpersonal skills helps build on, when you're hiring people for their interpersonal skills, ongoing informal training. So if they're getting a different type of patient than they've seen in a while on the unit, taking 10 minutes, doing a briefing, what do we need to look out for with this type of patient? What are the most important things? Developmental performance appraisal as opposed to just evaluative, which is what they do at Vanderbilt University when they're deciding between my 0.9 and 1.0% raise. So the developmental performance appraisals are ongoing. They're 360 degrees, so you're getting appraised by the person above you, at your level, and below you. And they're also focused on learning and growth and development, personal development. Employee involvement, so do I have actual discretion over my work practice? Does my voice, when I say, hey, something needs to operate differently, do I have the ability to change that? There's not much variability in nursing in terms of contingent compensation. You know, we heard a little bit earlier about incentive compensation and 40% of it being linked to safety. In nursing, there's compensation. There's not a whole lot of creative incentives. But there was some variation in terms of rewarding suggestions. And then, that's sneaky, I didn't even know you had that sign. And then lastly, job security. So if I'm speaking up about tough things, do I feel like I'm going to get fired, right? And job security helps mitigate against that. So how do these HR practices help? So it's these bundle of practices together. So these all kind of work together to help infuse more processes of mindful organizing. They change the way in which people interact inside an organization. How do they do that? Well, they signal the behaviors expected, supported, and rewarded. And what do they signal about? How work is to be carried out. So if you have developmental performance appraisal, then coaching, learning and feedback seeking become more important. Coaching is seen as a valued skill. If you're selecting people and training them for interpersonal skills, it means we should be carrying out our work together. They also do something else, because the idea of employee engagement came up a little bit ago. I'm gonna present some counterintuitive thoughts on that. These HR practices also foster a psychological contract. They give us a sense of what our deal is at work. What investments is the organization making in us, and what are they expecting that we reciprocate in turn? So if employees are valued and treated fairly, they should reciprocate by being committed to the organization and engaging in discretionary effort, kind of going above and beyond the call of duty, right? And so here's the model we're going to test with fancy structural equation modeling, which I will not bore you with the details of. So these HR practices include selective staffing, developmental performance appraisal, that bundle of practices I was talking about. And what we're arguing is they change the nature of the interactions. They make them more respectful, more characterized by trust, honesty, and self and mutual respect. And those interactions then influence that mindful organizing, that capability for detecting and correcting the unexpected, which we expect will be positively associated with patient safety. We also think those HR practices will have a direct effect on patient safety, and they'll also work through that bottom pathway, which is more about a psychological contract. So if my organization invests in me, I'm going to be more committed to it, and I'm going to engage in what are called organizational citizenship behaviors. That's not OCD, it's OCB. So that means going above and beyond the call of duty, helping others in the organization, things like that. And that's expected to have positive impact on patient safety as well. And what we actually find is something interesting. So this is a very complex picture, so I'll walk you through it slowly. HR practices are associated with higher levels of respectful interaction, so the interactions are better, which is associated with higher levels of mindful organizing. And then we see mindful organizing is associated with fewer medication errors and fewer patient falls, and that's controlling for prior levels of that. So what you're seeing is the actual change in medication errors and patient falls. So mindful organizing is associated with a negative change in that, which means a reduction of those things. And then you see those direct effects of HR practices negatively associated with medication errors and patient falls. Those are good things associated with reductions in medication errors and patient falls. So those basic practices that managers put in place for hiring and training matter, not just in the quality of how people are interacting, but also directly on those kind of outcomes. And then lastly, on the bottom pathway, we see HR practices are associated with higher levels of commitment, as expected. Commitment is associated with more discretionary effort. If I'm more engaged, more committed to my organization, I'm going to go above and beyond the call of duty, and that kills people. So there's the punchline there. That's the counterintuitive result. So this organizational citizenship behavior, we can talk about this in the Q&A because I don't have enough time to get into it here. But that's associated with higher levels of medication errors and higher levels of patient falls, which is quite counterintuitive. What I would say is don't just get people all revved up and just wanting to go above and beyond the call of duty, because when people go above and beyond the call of duty, sometimes they work outside of their competence, and that might be problematic, okay? I've got some other explanations for why that might be too. So lastly, so what we find here is that mindful organizing is this kind of distinctive capability that uniquely explains performance. It's associated with quality and safety outcomes. It's enhanced by complementary practices, and it's also enabled by these HR practices. And we've also talked about safety culture as something that occurs through processes of enabling, enacting, and elaborating. So thanks for your time and attention. We'll talk more with questions later.
You know, Tim, when I went to college, none of my professors had the personality you have. So where do you teach? Our next speaker is Patrick Smith, and he comes from the country that just beat this country in, what sport was it? Ice hockey, men's and women's. I went ahead and said that because he was going to talk about it, and now you can't talk about it. You remember Jeff yesterday, he went on and on and on. Well, we're not going to go there. He was arrested again, I think. Patrick is the business leader of the Operation Business Unit and the Chief Conservation Officer at Canada's National Energy Board. Patrick assumed this position in May of 2011 after acting as business leader in applications for 1 year and leading several compliance teams within the Operation Business Unit at the NEB. The Operation Business Unit is accountable for safety, environmental matters, security, pertaining to facilities under the NEB Act and a number of other acts. It conducts safety, security, and environmental inspections and audits, investigates accidents, and monitors emergency responses. Patrick has a lot of degrees from those Canadian universities, which I can't pronounce the name, so we're not going there. Patrick, with that, it's all yours.
Great. Well, thanks very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. And Tim, I got to say, I'm here from Calgary. I know what the weather's like in Calgary. I talked with my wife last night, and believe it or not, this is a better place to be today. I have to fly home tomorrow, and although I'm looking forward to seeing my family, I'm not looking forward to arriving to see the weather that we're going to be experiencing when I'm back in Calgary. So my presentation isn't going to be as animated as Tim's, but I hope you find it interesting. What I'm going to do is talk about a stop that we've made on a journey the NEB has been taking since 1959 when we were created. And we're always looking at ensuring that we have a robust regulatory framework that's meaningful and holds companies accountable. And when you look at the regulation of pipeline, the end goal for us is to ensure that the public is protected and the environment is protected. So, you know, with that in mind, what we've done is we have constantly ensured that we have meaningful regulation in place. And the piece that I'll talk about today is our onshore pipeline regulation. And going back to 1999, we put the onshore pipeline regulation in place that had aspects of management system requirements in it. And it made specific reference to the Canadian Standards Association, CSA Z662, onshore pipeline, pipeline, it's the pipeline standard in Canada. What we did in 2011, we identified the need to revise and update that regulation, and we did that finally last year by including a few more provisions around management systems and entrenching some aspects of safety culture within the regulation. So now we get to a point on our journey where we need to define what do we mean by safety culture, and are we all talking the same language? Does industry understand what our expectations are? Do we understand what we're expecting from industry when we talk about safety culture? Last June in Calgary, we had a safety forum, And Jeff was there from PHMSA, and we talked about management systems, we talked about safety in general, and we talked about safety culture. One of the panels was half a dozen senior executives from the pipeline industries, and they all said, yes, we believe in safety culture, we believe in the target of 0 incidents, and a couple of them even were so bold as to say, you're welcome to come in and audit our safety culture. It's fantastic to hear that. But now, from a regulator's perspective, we need to figure out what do we really mean, and what do we want to convey to industry? And so what we did coming out of the safety forum is we drafted a discussion paper, and we did that in cooperation with a couple other regulators. I'll talk about it soon. And this discussion paper is our take on what the definition of safety culture could be, and the attributes of safety culture, both positive and negative attributes. So I have the pleasure today of presenting this paper. I didn't pen it. One of my staff, the National Energy Board, held the pen but worked collaboratively with another of other regulators, and it is certainly a collaborative effort. So if you'll bear with me, I will go through this, and then we'll open it up to some questions. All right. So in high hazard industries, we see that there's two kinds of accidents. Accidents that happens to individuals and accidents that happen to organizations. Individual accidents are more frequent and have limited consequence, although the consequences can be significant to those affected. Example would be a worker fatality or an injury. Organizational accidents are rare, but the outcomes can be catastrophic in nature. Organizational accidents have widespread consequences on uninvolved populations, assets, and the environment. And the example that I'll use is populations living in the Gulf of Mexico coastal regions who were impacted by the BP Macondo oil spill. However, they had no direct involvement in the actual blowout. Organizational accidents occur within systems that have been built with multiple defenses. They have multiple causes involving many people at various levels throughout the organization and possibly beyond. And by that I mean contractors, regulators, etc. They include judgment and decision-making errors, and they have impacts that endure long after the event itself. Organizational accidents pose the greatest risk to people and the environment. In the oil and gas industry, they include things like hydrocarbon releases, explosions, and fires. I'm sure you've all seen this diagram, and this has been the basis of the work that we've been doing. Defense against organizational accidents requires several layers of overlapping and mutually supportive protection. Protective layers are such things as technical devices, physical barriers, protective equipment, system design, regulatory surveillance, rules and procedures, training, supervision, etc. Protections are breached by threats caused by human, technical, and organizational factors or conditions. All three are continually influenced by competing values between production and protection. Human decisions and actions, in other words, behaviors, are implicated in all organizational accidents and are often caused by latent conditions such as inadequate resourcing, shortfalls in training, or unworkable processes and procedures, which impair the necessary layers of protection. These conditions often arise from strategic management decisions, which are informed by the company's values with respect to production versus protection. The impact of these decisions introduces threats into the safety system and shapes the corporate safety culture by signaling the importance of one value over another. There's clear evidence from analysis of global incidents, including work conducted at the NEB itself on our own Arctic offshore drilling review, that safety culture is a key factor in most organizational incidents. So how did we get to where we are today? And I talked about the journey. And an important step on this journey took place in May of 2013, where the NEB facilitated a meeting here in Washington. It was a special meeting of North American oil and gas regulators that was convened in order to discuss improving safety and environmental outcomes by leveraging safety culture. The meeting included representatives from the National Energy Board, Canada's Newfoundland and Labrador Offshore Petroleum Board, Canada's Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board, the United States Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, or BSEE, and of course our friends at PHMSA. During that meeting, several opportunities were identified by the regulators to move a concerted safety culture effort forward. And that included building a shared understanding of the term of safety culture among the regulators and regulated companies, articulating clear regulatory expectations as they relate to safety culture, and collaborating on the development of reference and resource material for industry in order to provide clarity and consistency with respect to terminology and safety culture dimensions and attributes where possible. So the discussion paper that we published on our website on the 31st of October provides a draft definition of safety culture and a draft framework, and that's the result of multi-agency collaboration between the NEB and the two Canadian offshore boards, with input, of course, from our American friends. Its purpose is to promote learning and shared understanding of safety culture among the companies regulated by each of the respective regulatory agencies. It is also intended to articulate each board's expectations that the companies they regulate build and maintain a positive safety culture while scrutinizing their organizations for potential cultural threats. So here's the draft definition that we put out. This particular definition is expressed in plain language and can easily be applied across the oil and gas sector regardless of the scope and nature of a company's operational activities. In addition, the Canada and Newfoundland Offshore Petroleum Board, coming out of their onshore helicopter safety inquiry implementation team, comprised of representatives from the regulator, industry, and labor, recommended this very definition because of its ease of understanding across all levels of an organization. Note the definition of safety extends beyond occupational safety to operational safety overall. The draft safety culture framework was developed using a comprehensive assessment process. Several literature reviews were conducted, and numerous safety culture frameworks were reviewed, dissected, and assessed for relevance for use in the oil and gas context. The following classification was developed for use in the capture of key aspects of safety culture. So dimensions, they represent 8 high-level safety culture characteristics. Attributes are intended to succinctly articulate the most critical themes found within the dimension. And descriptors are detailed examples of how the themes may be expressed within an organization. With respect to a draft framework, we propose that there are 4 negative dimensions that act as threats to existing organizational safety defenses. Those being production pressure, complacency, normalization of deviance, and tolerance of inadequate systems and resources. On the other side of the spectrum, there are 4 positive dimensions that act as cultural defenses against these threats. Those being committed safety leadership, vigilance, empowerment and accountability, and resiliency. The most notable difference of this draft safety culture framework when compared to other frameworks is the inclusion of both positive and negative dimensions, attributes, and descriptors. There are two important aspects of the development of a strong organizational culture of safety. There are necessary efforts that promote the creation and enhancement of positive safety culture influences. Example, leadership, commitment, effective communication, and learning from past events. But there are equally important needs to identify and manage negative safety culture influences. And again, examples are acceptance of inadequate resources, invulnerability, lack of unease about safety matters, etc. They may coexist in the organization or parts thereof. Focused attention and proactive management of both cultural defenses and threats provide the greatest protection against organizational accidents. So the draft framework can best be articulated by considering the work of the dimensions in the context of James Reason's Swiss cheese model. In this slide, we see the 4 negative dimensions acting as cultural threats that breach or degrade the protective layers within the safety system. In this slide, we see the 4 positive safety culture dimensions acting as overarching defenses. These dimensions act to deflect the cultural threats and reduce the risk that latent conditions or active failures will impair the safety system. So as I mentioned, we issued this discussion paper at the end of October last year. The consultation period ran through to the 30th of January 2014. Comments and feedback received will be reviewed and considered for incorporation into the final version of the definition and the framework. I want to give you a little bit of insight into the nature of the feedback that we received. And of course, all of this will eventually go on the website, but we need to complete our assessment and then take this in front of the board to figure out which way we're going to go. And it's not just our board, it's going to be the boards of the 2 offshore organizations in Canada as well. So the themes that we saw coming out of the feedback: is the NEB intending to pursue development of safety culture regulation? Is there a common understanding and application of safety culture between North American regulators? They're looking for more detail. So what does this look like on a go-forward basis? And they need clarity on NEB expectations. At least they've asked for it. They would need more dialogue between the regulator and industry, with a specific focus on ensuring that we engage OSH professionals within the industry. Questions about what the linkage is to our current regulation, OPR, and the management systems that are captured within that regulation and the management system requirements. And then the last piece that I'll highlight here is how would the regulator evaluate compliance? So if we set up criteria, how would we ensure that industry is meeting our expectations? So good questions, and this is something that we're in the process of evaluating right now to ensure that we have a good understanding of what needs to be done. So I will go on to this next page here, because Jeff asked me to highlight for you where you can find this discussion paper on our website. This is a snapshot of our website, and at the top of it is the URL, and I encourage you to read the paper. It's I think it's about 18 pages. There's a lot of material in there, and although our comment period has concluded, if you do have comments, I encourage you to send them our way, because as we look at next steps, we'll be doing analysis internally, and then we'll be engaging our 2 offshore boards. And there's a commitment that we will come back down to Washington here, engage BSEE, engage PHMSA, and see if there's a North American solution for this thing. So if you have comments, I encourage you to submit them. With that, I'm going to end off, and I'll sit down and take your questions. I have highlighted here a contact within the National Energy Board. She is our project manager, Claudine Bradley, and she's been facilitating the discussions with our regulatory partners. And I encourage you, if you have questions, if you have comments, you can send them directly to Claudine. So thanks very much. Look forward to fielding any questions you may have.
All right, any questions from our guests here in the room first? Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Again-
Vern Meyer with TransCanada. Well, and it's a question to both panel speakers here, and it's one that we've struggled quite a bit with internally, and we've had probably internally dealing with the issue of safety culture and how to understand it and how to improve it within the organization, I'd say for at least 5 or 6 years. And we often question ourselves internally what the state of the art is of, well, and here's a question, I guess, is it an art or is it a science, a safety culture? And so that's one question I'd put to both of the panel speakers is, how would you characterize the maturity, I guess, of the science? Let's call it a science of safety culture. And then in that context, what should the role of a regulator be relative to the state of the art? And if I could get perspectives from each one of you, because I think both of you might potentially come from a different place, that'd be appreciated.
Sure. So in terms of the state of the art, the state of the science, so I would say the state of the union and safety culture is strong. There's a good body of quantitative research on what's called safety climate. Now let me differentiate that for you from safety culture. So safety culture is kind of those deeper assumptions that Don was talking about. You know, it's kind of, so culture is difficult to measure via survey. So really what you're measuring when you measure something, a culture via surveys, you're measuring the climate. So it's people's perceptions of the practices, the norms, the way things are done around the organization. So there's a massive body of research on that. I've done 2 very lengthy reviews that I've published in healthcare about that. I'm working on one that's kind of a cross-industry one right now. So there's just a massive amount of research, and the research is overwhelmingly of the variety of, yes, safety climate matters for the kind of outcomes you care about. Accidents, errors, be they organizational accidents, you know, so production process kind of errors and problems, and personal injuries as well. So there's a huge body of research on that. There's also a significant body of work on specific interventions that leaders can do to shape a safety climate. You know, there's, for example, in healthcare, one thing that I didn't mention, but I think it's relevant to something I believe Nick said earlier about you got to get out of the office and go to the site. Or there's some great work on leader rounding and its effect on safety climate and its consequent effect on errors and outcomes like that. So there's a lot of research, and I would be happy to provide you with more specific details. Feel free to drop me an email, give me a call, whatever, and I'm more than happy to provide that. And I won't be completely self-serving and just send you my own stuff on the topic. So there's a lot of work on that, and the measurement of safety climate does not have to be long. So they don't have to be, you know, just massive surveys. The items that I use related to that have been developed and validated 30 plus years ago, and it's a 9-item scale to measure safety climate. It's a pretty straightforward by a guy named Dov Zohar, who's an Israeli researcher who's kind of the father of safety climate in a lot of ways. And go ahead, Patrick.
Thanks. Well, from an NEB perspective, you know, when you look at your question, is it an art or a science? Probably a little bit of both. And you know, we're just at the start of our journey in trying to define from a regulator's perspective where safety culture fits. We're pretty clear on where management systems fit, and we know that safety culture needs to be intertwined within the management systems. But what does that mean, and what does that look like? Recognizing that with management systems, depending on the size of an organization and how much pipe they're operating, the levels of sophistication are going to vary. So I think right off the bat, when we look at it from a management systems perspective, we realize that the playing field is quite wide and quite long, and we're trying to figure out how we equalize that. So work to be done, and I'm hoping that as we move forward with our discussion paper and come back and re-engage industry and other stakeholders, that we'll be able to converge on what this looks like going forward. Now, your question about the role of the regulator, that's a real good question, and that's one that our board is wrestling with right now. And what I would say is it's to be determined. And I'll use a quote from the chair of the National Energy Board. He was down here a week ago at NARUC meetings, and he was quoted in a publication. I can't remember what the name of it is, and he was asked, "Well, what are you going to do?" And Gaetan Caron said, "Well, it's kind of like a dog chasing a car, and we've been chasing the car, and the question is, once the dog grabs onto the bumper, what does it do with it?" So we're trying to figure out, once we grab onto the bumper, that is safety culture, what do we do with it? So this is the very discussion that we're having within the National Energy Board right now and with our partner regulators.
And I have one additional
Can I
thought.
respond to Patrick? Patrick will help you and show you what to do with the car. Go ahead.
So I just, one thought on the role of regulators. So, you know, I thought George's comments on INPO were instructive, and I think what he was saying about the work they've done with the Joint Commission in healthcare, so that's something that I'm more familiar with, and I think the things that they do, to the extent it's valuable at all, and some question that, because I think they're a much weaker form than what you heard from INPO. They do some good things with auditing, right, and kind of accreditation things, so they at least force people to attend to specific things, so a regulator can help direct attention. That's valuable. They can help foster learning in some kind of ways. Some work that I've done with the Joint Commission is around collaboratives they have on organizations that want to become highly reliable, so they've kind of self-selected into that, and they want to figure out how can they better assess where they are relative to these high reliability industries, and how can they chart a course to going there. They want to work and learn from each other and bring in experts and things like that. So I think in fostering kind of collaboratives might be a way for them, regulators, to be useful too.
Linda?
So, Tim, I have minor surgery scheduled for next week that I think I'm now going to be canceling. My question, and I'm going to present it slightly differently. I think it goes to both of you. So I am a pipeline operator, and I have a darn good safety record. Okay, I haven't had any major issues. My people are all about safety. I think that they're great. We think we're great. We think we're top notch. And just because those other people over there are having problems doesn't mean my company's having a problem. So why should I spend the time and investment to adopt some of these new strategies and go to all that effort? Why should I do that?
Because when you think you've got it figured out, that's when you die. You know, so that's, I mean, seriously, when you stop paying attention, right, you're less mindful, you're not thinking, you think you've got it all on lockdown and under control, that's when errors happen, right? You know, so this is just infusing a set of practices. And for organizations, when I work with them and try to, you know, when I do interventions and things like that, not interventions like getting them off drugs, just interventions to like help them be safer. You might think I'm on drugs. So when I'm doing these interventions with organizations, a lot of what I'll tell them is, you might do most of these things most of the time. What I'm trying to help you do is do all of the things all of the time, right? I'm helping you make it systematic and doing it intentionally. So you might be doing a lot of things and you might have gotten away with things. There might be more slack in your system than you think. So your safety record is not a record of excellence necessarily. It's a record of consistent luck, you know? I think, you know, pursuing some of the things that these high reliability organizations do, these processes of mindful organizing and doing it knowingly and intentionally can be really helpful.
Mark?
Maybe I'll add on to that as well. And what I would reference is Deming's cycle of plan, do, check, act. And with any management system, there's always the element of continual improvement. So when you look at safety culture, I would characterize it as it's a journey. It's not a destination, and there's always room for improvement.
I'm Mark Harrith. Patrick, is there a story behind how you eventually got to the 4 cultural threats? And the reason I ask that is because I think one of the challenges we had in our working group is, how do you know when you have a complete set of something? And so can you provide some insight on how you got to those 4, and was there thinking that moved in various directions and you got there eventually, or did those emerge very quickly?
I wouldn't say that they emerged quickly. When we were developing this framework, we had a lot of very smart people working on this, including Dr. Mark Fleming, who is with St. Mary's University up in Halifax, and this is his specialty. So we engaged him, and we also engaged the safety folks from the 2 offshore boards in Canada. Extensive literature review. And I would say a lot of batting different ideas around. And one of the other vehicles that we have available to us at the National Energy Board is the International Regulators Forum. And that's the group of offshore safety regulators who get together and talk about the state of the union as it relates to offshore safety. And we've been working very closely with the 2 Canadian offshore boards on their initiative with the IRF to define what does safety culture look like as it relates to offshore safety. So a lot of people involved in this thing, and a lot of good thinking went into the model we have right now. Now, we're not saying that this is the best model. We're not saying that this is the end result, but it's our first kick at it to put it out there and say, does this resonate with folks?
And I would say, Mark, that if you're waiting until you have all the safety threats mapped out, you're going to be waiting for a very long time, because I think that's almost the wrong way to pursue it. It reminds me of one of my favorite stories that one of my mentors and co-authors, Carl Weick, tells. He tells a story about a plane that crashes in the Alps. It's not the one where they end up eating each other, so don't worry, I'm not taking you there. So they crash in the Alps, there's a snowstorm, but fortunately they find a map and they make their way to safety. The interesting thing was the map was not of the Alps, it was of the Pyrenees. So sometimes when you're in a snowstorm, any old map will do. And that might apply here too, right? You know, just start moving.
I'm John Jacoby. If I can make a comment to add to that, you know, things are going good. You don't have any incidents. You're doing your own thing as a pipeline operator. I can assure you that sooner or later the statistics will catch up. You will have an incident, and it will in fact increase your liability and your civil liability and cost you a great deal more than if you've been following the rules and continuing your improvement.
afraid we have to cut the questions at this point. At this point, I believe Jeff and Ron have some closing remarks.
I've actually come up to ask Tim to do the hip hop rendition for us. I think he's not kidding you, and I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube. It is. Okay, very good. Next time, Tim, we'll have a longer session, but we'll try to recruit you in to do the hip hop and enliven the group a little bit. Thank you both for your time. I appreciate that very much. Ron and I have a couple of closing comments. I'm mostly up here to thank you for coming. For the members of the SMS work group, it's sort of cathartic. You know, for the rest of you, now you know what we went through for meeting after meeting after meeting. It would be bouncing around on these ideas and then eventually trying to figure out, thanks to Mark and others, Stacy and others who would generate a lot of text, you know, how can we embed that in something that's meaningful? So in just a second, Ron's going to tell you how you can comment on the document. But point out for the people who are here, you know, there were upwards of 200 people on the webcast off and on. So I think that that's a growing trend. We can use that, try to save our friends from Calgary from having to travel so far. Although we like seeing them, they seemingly bring cold weather with them, right? We're in the teens tonight or something. Up here, this is not good. I don't know what it's going to be like when you get home, Patrick, if you're still out there, but I bet it's cold. So at any rate, I'm mostly here to say thank you very much. I want to thank the people on the webcast for dialing in. Thank you for participating, you know, and sending your questions, and I think that really helps a lot. Thanks also to the moderators and hosts. Obviously, we took people from the committee and made them work, you know. It's good to get them busy. So I think with that, I'll wish you all well, but I'll ask Ron to come up and talk to you just a little bit about, we'll have copies of the document out here for you, and Ron will go through that and how you can submit comments. So thank you.
Well, thanks, Jeff, and in particular, thanks to PHMSA for hosting this. I know it was a tremendous amount of work. You know, I consider the quality of speakers we had today, and, you know, this was a free workshop, and people pay really good money to hear this quality of instruction and experience. So thanks very much. I just don't think it could have been any better. Just a couple comments on, I think, Cameron, you have a slide that shows our URL. Okay. Let me give you a couple of instructions about entering comments. And we really do want constructive comments. There's 3 or 4 things you really have to do right for your comments to be registered. One is don't email them to me. I'll be glad to read your emails, as would Jeff or anyone else on the committee, but that won't be an official registered, acted upon comment. The only place to register those comments is through this link at API. And there's a reason for that. We're going to consider the merit of every single comment, and we will document how we discussed it and what the outcome was. And if it's not done through this portal, we will be unable to track it adequately to comply with the ANSI and API standard for this. So only put them through this URL. There's about 4 things you have to do. 1, go to this URL. Second, you don't really have to enter a login ID. You just put in the ballot number. When you get to this website, all balloting will be there. Now, you won't really have a vote at this level, but it will be as if there's a ballot, and it will receive your comment. There are 4 items you have to include, you know, your personal information, so we can respond or ask for clarification. Now, it's not that personal, but if you're going to put a comment, we need to know how to get back to you for clarification. So please read these instructions carefully. They're actually on the front of the document that we have available for everyone out there. The document's about 45 pages. I'm going to say about 15 or 20 of it's a lot of, I don't want to diminish the importance of boilerplate, but some of them are just how standards are to be used and API clarifications. There's probably 25 pages that are substantial. Now, let me ask you to, before you begin to enter comments, go through this process. You know, our team, I think I mentioned earlier, we deliberated, we argued, we negotiated, and hours and hours sometimes on what might seem like small items, but they were important to the team members for different reasons. I can't think of a single time we decided an issue by voting. We managed to bring the viewpoints together and figure out what the right thing to do was. Now, I remember one vote we had, we were arguing whether something should be here in the document or somewhere else, but it wasn't substantive about comment. It was more about, where does this go? And after about an hour and a half, I couldn't take it anymore, and we did a vote, and that's where we put it. But I want to be really clear. This document was not a majority rule or a vote. It was trying to think through, why do people feel the way they do? So here's the don't. I'm going to ask both the people here and anyone watching on the web, don't read a section of it and then begin to comment. Read through the whole thing and think about, what does it say in the context of other paragraphs? Because you may land on a place you either really like or you don't like. Well, if you put that in context with the rest of the document that's been pretty carefully deliberated, your concern might be addressed. And so I would suggest read it, think about what it really means, reread it, and maybe then consider putting in comments. Again, I can't express enough appreciation for the members of the committee that's worked so hard on this, you know, for PHMSA and our state regulators and the public. Stacy carried a big job in responding for the millions of people out there. We merely had a few industries to worry about. And PHMSA's leadership in this has really been premier. And again, Jeff, thanks so much for hosting this. Incredible job, incredible slate of speakers, and I just don't recall ever having been to one that had such quality and so many things to kind of think about as we move forward. And I'm going to say one more thing. Be sure you learn from others. It's the cheapest form of knowledge. Continuous improvement, and the most expensive is that you go learn for yourself. So, Jeff, I'm going to give it back to you, and you can say.
Actually, I have a question for you.
Okay.
You can probably answer, Peter can answer. Where can people on the webcast actually get the document?
So I will answer that. I'm Peter Lidiak with API. Once you get to the process of getting onto the system, putting your information in, and you'll see the place where you can start to enter comments, there's a big button in the upper left-hand corner that will tell you you can download the document. And so you want to hit that button, you'll download the document, it'll come to you in a PDF form, and that's how you're going to get the document from online.
And they get the entire document with the instructions, right?
That's right.
Okay. Any closing comments? Thank you all for coming. Personally, this has been one of my best invested days. So thanks to all the speakers, and we look forward to hearing from you through the web portal.